And all of a sudden, in walks Saddam Hussein. And hellfire. Literally, the hairs on the back, not just my neck, but everybody. You could see goosebumps on everybody. It just felt evil. It was like as if the devil himself had just come into the room.
Why did you join the forces? What appealed to you?
Why did I join the forces? Now, this goes back now, because when I was 4, I remember going to Royal Air Force in Athens open day, like an air show that they had. It's just outside Cardiff. And my mum and dad took me there. And I remember the ground shaking, watching these lightning jet aircraft take off and then go vertical, basically, on full afterburners. And the ground was shaking. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And that sort of tied in with me wanting to be an astronaut and all the sort of things that I was thinking of when I was a young'un. When I failed my A-levels and I had other friends that were going on to university, apprenticeships, college, etc., I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But every day I walked past the careers office for the Army, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force in Cardiff. And I saw the posters on the wall and I thought, that bit of me about aviation and wanting to sort of go and see the world, it just all made sense.
And so what was your first job in the Air Force?
As a fully badged member of the Royal Air Force, I went in as a communications systems analyst. That was different from a regular communication systems analyst because they got taught Morse code and we got taught a language. And we weren't even told what language it was going to be at first. It was it was shrouded in mystery. All I knew is that I had to take what was then called a PV, a positively vetting sort of path, that my family would be interviewed, my background would be thoroughly investigated to make sure I was squeaky clean. And then you go into a sort of a secret establishment, really. So you learn a language and then you get taught your tradecraft, which is ultimately being an eavesdropper.
So what does that mean? What were you learning when you first got to?
Well, I learned Russian. So it was my primary operational language in the military was Russian. So that was pretty much just over a year-long language course. And then you have about 6 to 8 months then after that of your applied training, as they term it, which is then learning your tradecraft of how to apply that language in the real world and what's required of you, which is the classified element.
So Spook's basically a spy.
Yeah, that's exactly what my granddad said. When I finished my training as a Russian op, basically, and I went back home and we were given these little slips of paper and it was basically the unclassified version of what we could actually say. And it was like 3 lines. And I had it in my wallet and I went back home and my granddad is a former coal miner with hands like shovels. And I give it to my granddad. I said, here we go, this is what I'm doing. And he went, oh, I see, he got his glasses on, had a look and went, oh, you're a spy then.
So you're learning Russian and then 9/11 happens in 2001 and then how does that kind of affect your work in the army? What happens there?
When 9/11 happened, I'd just come back from an exercise and I was on leave. I got past the phone and it was my boss and he said, your leave's cancelled, get your backside into work, I need to brief you quickly. Got into work and the boss said, look, there's 6 of you who've been selected, you're off onto a Pashto course. Now Pashto, I knew it was a language in Central Asia, knew that there was elements within Afghanistan that spoke it and also Balochistan, which is on the Pakistan border. And off we went. So the 6 of us had 3 months to learn Pashto up to a really decent level. So that's reading, writing, and actually, obviously listening, but speaking it as well, to be able to converse, to get the points across, so we can find out pieces of the intelligence jigsaw again in Afghanistan. And the raison d'etre for that basically was to find Osama bin Laden. That was the mission.
And how did you feel knowing you were going to be the first people in the world hunting Osama bin Laden?
We were the first in the world in Afghanistan to be hunting him, for sure, you know. So when I say about the Five Eyes community, this isn't a classified thing. After the end of the Second World War, the English-speaking nations got together and said, look, we can't get caught with our pants down again, so we need to sort of share our intelligence. So ultimately, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. But those guys already knew about bin Laden, but obviously the 9/11 side of things was a step up. Nobody expected him to jump up to that level and to sort of break through and have the audacity to attack America, really. So I think everybody was G'd up, really. We were quite buoyant about being over there, getting on with the job and getting rid of or holding bin Laden to account.
How did you hunt for terrorists in Afghanistan?
You're looking for the pattern of life. You're looking for things that stand out. So you need to know what routine looks like. If I worked in this building, would I work a regular hour? Would I work 8 till 4, 9 till 5, whatever it is? Would my route then take me via a coffee shop back to the train station, to the tube, etc., etc.? You can plot these movements around. So that's what you're building up over a passage of time then. You are finding out that key element, that pattern of life of what is the routine, what is the norm for these people we perceive to be threats. And for looking for suspicious people, they do stand out. They will be shifty. They will be conscious of cameras around them. They will be conscious of police or people watching them. They will be very, very nervy. They're not cool customers.
Where were al-Qaeda and the Taliban hiding?
I remember being on the border, which is the Hindu Kush mountain range, and we're having a quiet time. But things are going on around us still, and you're thinking, well, where are the comms? All of a sudden, you were starting to notice certain things around us that were unusual, like mirrors. So you get a glint, and you're thinking, is that somebody in a quiet part? We don't see anybody in this mountain range. So you're thinking, is somebody up there with a mirror or binoculars? And you can see the sun reflecting, but the reflection is quite rapid. And you realize that they're actually messaging. So you look behind you along the mountain ridge and you'll see somebody responding with another glint. So that then is a whole new ball game, because you can't detect that with our equipment. You have to have the Mark I eyeball on the ground aware of these such actions. So they're using primitive methods. So when we're in the mountain range as well, we also noticed, as well as the mirrors, hawks, birds of prey. They had messages attached to the legs. They had little capsules that were taped to the legs. And these birds were taught to fly along the ridge and literally pass messages back and forth. So again, primitive methods, So at times you try and catch these, but if you catch them, that shows the message isn't getting through, and we're savvy to that type of thing. So primitive methods, but ultimately they were working.
And how dangerous was it, Paul, when you were out there? What was the danger and what were the possible threats to you?
Oh, the threats are there all the time, obviously. The weapons are commonplace over there. The Soviet Union occupied Afghanistan in the 80s. And the aftermath of that subsequently means that a lot of weaponry was left over. So you tend to see Kalashnikov rifles wherever you go. They're for sale in the souks. You can go there and you can buy some nice fresh vegetables and fruit, and you can have some nice sort of a kebab sort of feast going on. Oh, by the way, would you like a Kalashnikov? It's really quite surreal, and you're seeing young kids walking around with an automatic weapon on their back. And it's quite unnerving. I was reminded at the time that when we were doing some training, and one of the guys said, so if they open fire, run towards them. And I was like, hang on, you're getting this wrong. I'm Royal Air Force, I'll go that way. I'm not going that way. He goes, no, mate, you're wrong, because the Kalashnikov are the old Soviet ones that are from the 80s. They haven't really been maintained particularly well. So you got a selector switch on it, which goes from round to automatic. So if you pull the trigger and it's on round, you fire just the one bullet. If it's on automatic, you'll go through a magazine. So the entire magazine will be emptied in a blink of an eye, basically. But a lot of them are rusted on automatic. So it's a 7.62 caliber bullet. So it's quite a bit of an elephant gun, really. And it's quite weighty. And these guys are not exactly professional marksmen. So when they fire it, they're not aiming it and holding it properly. So they'll just fire it like they're in a Hollywood movie. Subsequently, they'll get bounced backwards and the gun will just rise. So by the time they've gathered control of it and the magazine is empty and they've got to change the magazine, you're in their face, so you can just smack them in the chops, basically. So that was a bit of advice that I was given in Afghanistan. So if you're going to open fire and you're in close proximity to yourself and it's just the one guy firing and there's not obviously a complete barrage coming towards us and you think you can take him out and get to him in time, then run to the guy and smack him in the mush, basically.
Did you ever kill anyone, or did you ever find any intelligence that led to killing anyone?
That question, I've been asked that question before, and I like to rephrase it, how many people we saved. And ultimately, yes, as part of the machine, when you're doing intelligence, if we're hunting bad guys and taking out threats that are ultimately going to save lives and save our guys on the ground that are going in, that are moving, whether it be on the ground, in the air, or at sea, okay? If we're detecting a threat, we call it I and W, indication and warning. And if we perceive a threat is going on, we can send messages direct to those assets, save lives, and also then, conversely, you can target as well. So if you know a threat is at a certain location, then that gets passed to what we call it a CAOC, it's a Combined Air Operations Center, and then that person then becomes a target. But I must state that UK policy is that we have zero collateral damage. So we're in this studio today. If I was the target for our armed forces, they wouldn't drop a Hellfire missile to take me out now because you guys are here too. So rules of engagement are really, really strictly adhered to. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. So you can't go gung-ho.
And how close did you get to completing your mission, hunting terrorists and finding bin Laden?
We found people. We found people, certainly.
And you spent time in Iraq working as a weapons inspector. Tell me a bit about that.
When I was a weapons inspector with the United Nations, that was part of the United Nations Special Commissions. We were looking for weapons of mass destruction, termed WMD, in Iraq. There's a lot of concerns about nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands and ultimately could be used by terrorist groups or be ferried out to nations that would ultimately use them against other countries on a state-on-state attack. When you get put on a team in the United Nations, you are not UK military, you're there as a member of the United Nations Special Commission. So you are answering directly to the chief inspector, which was a guy called Richard Butler, an Australian guy who was running the teams when I joined, so that was 97, 98. And I remember flying in to Baghdad, on air base to the south of Baghdad, and we got bussed into Baghdad itself, and our first stop was in their version of the Home Office, okay? So we went in and we were waiting to be briefed. We were told that it might be a very important person, a VIP coming in from the Ba'ath Party. We didn't know who. So all of a sudden, you could see fear in the guards' faces in the room. And it was quite a large room. We were just sat on plastic chairs. We had our day sacks with us. We just had notepads with us as well, just to sort of jot anything down that might be useful, logistical bits and bobs. And all of a sudden, in walks Saddam Hussein. And hellfire, literally the hairs on the back, not just my neck, but everybody. You could see goosebumps on everybody, including the chief inspector, you know, it was, and he'd met him before. And it was, I use the analogy that it was a bit like in watching the Harry Potter movies when the Dementors come into the room and suck the living heebie-jeebies out of it. It was like that. It just felt evil. It was like as if the devil himself had just come into the room. And you could see the fear, the complete fear in the Iraqis that were there, let alone what we were feeling, you know, and it was just a really sort of a menacing presence. So that was the most scared I have ever been. He'd already invaded Kuwait, you know, he'd already done, you know, the war against Iran, which lasted for 8 years. In the 1980s, the fact that he'd used chemical weapons against the Kurds in the north and the Shias in the south. This is the devil himself, basically. He's not afraid of anyone. And that was quite apparent. You realize the significance of what we were doing and the risk that we were taking, you know, at that time. It really was quite treacherous.
How long were you in the armed forces for, and do you ever miss it?
I was in the UK military for 23 years. I was signed to age 55, so ultimately I could still be serving today, albeit it be in my final few months of service now. But I don't miss it. And the reason by that is because when I left, I went straight into a defense consultancy and forensic role. So I was doing a lot of counter-terror work and also advising. And after the 7/7 bombings, the UK government set up a system called Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure, which again, I was advising on that, on certain aspects of that, again, regarding counter-drone work. So I've done a lot of different things.
How much of an insight into UK's approach to counter-terrorism can you give us? How important is it?
Oh, it's very important. I think from a global perspective, I think the UK does it to the best of our ability. The fact that we've not had a significant attack for a few years now speaks volumes. I'm not saying that, that's it, we've sorted it. We haven't. You can't stop a lone wolf. You can't really predict against that if they're off-grid. So if their pattern of life is left of center, you don't see it coming. You can't really do a great deal to prevent it, but you can curtail it and you can respond rapidly to it. So from a counter-terror perspective, the UK really has it the best as it can be, really. The pride in the work that the guys and girls do from a counter-terror perspective, from an intelligence picture perspective, I'm so proud and privileged to have come from that kind of background, and I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants, basically. The work goes on today. So it's a 24/7 operation. It's not a 9 to 5. It is there and it is real, and there are people who are highly trained, more so now than ever before. So I can't say that it won't happen again, but rest assured that on this troubled earth that we live in at the moment, that you see in chaos on all four corners of the world, and our part of the European continent, we're relatively safe, and we have the best people on it.
The first 4 weeks is called aptitude. Walking over the hills with a pack that gets larger and larger, with a distance that gets further and further. I had toenails missing, I had skin off the back, I had blisters on my feet, I had a dislodged retina. I had all sorts wrong with my body by the end of that 4 weeks.